Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Canadian Electricity Association's Conversation webinar series. The Canadian Electricity Association is the voice of the electricity industry in Canada. My name is Alex Kent, a manager in the Transmission and Distribution Policy team at CEA. I am pleased to be your host for today's webinar. Conversation series features presentation from CEA's corporate partners and highlights a variety of Canadian and international solutions to current and future challenges faced by the industry. Working with CEA's corporate partners, these webinars have been developed to be of specific interest to those working in the electric utility space from generation through to the customer. For a list of upcoming sessions, please check out CEA's website at www.electricity.ca. These webinars allow a broad national audience to participate at no or low cost without the need to travel or invest a lot of time. We are broadcasting from Ottawa to over 25 locations across Canada today. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items. Our session is scheduled to run from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Questions can be asked, and we encourage you to do so as they come to mind by typing them into the question function on your screen. They will be asked at the end of the presentation. Also, please set all your devices to mute. A brief survey will be sent to webinar participants following the session today, and we very much appreciate your candid feedback on interest and are interested in any topics you would like to have included in the conversation series. Please keep an eye out for future webinars and events through CEA's monthly newsletter, Current Affairs. With over 6,000 subscribers, Current Affairs is the place to go for Canadian industry news as we connect the national value chain from generation to customer. If you would like to receive Current Affairs, you can subscribe for free via CEA's website, electricity.ca. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Today's topic is what smart grid projects in the US have taught us. Today, CEA is being presented to by Redline Communications. And during this webinar, Redline will discuss the lessons learned from 99 smart grid projects completed between 2009 and 2016 under the US Department of Energy's Smart Grid Investment Program. Most importantly, this webinar will discuss how these lessons can guide the industry to make better technology and partner selection decisions today. Your presenter is Isaac Mian, the VP of Sales Engineering at Redline Communications. Isaac, I'll now turn the webinar over to you.
Thank you, Alex. And welcome everyone to the webinar on what we can learn from smart grid projects in the US. Just keep in mind that while this analysis of the smart grid projects in US may seem slightly predated because these are from projects, as Alex mentioned, from 2009 2016. Just keep in mind that this is pretty much the only database of projects available out there from for public to learn from. So as Alex mentioned, Isaac Mia, I'm the VP of Sales and Support Engineering, Redline Communications. Before I start with today's topic, let me briefly introduce you to who Redline is and what we do. So Redline is a Canadian manufacturer of industrial grade private wireless networks. This includes private LTE as well as 5G in the near future. We are a publicly traded company listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. We have employees in, that should be updated, it's 15 countries, a customer base in about 70 countries, and our equipment is manufactured right here in Canada, in US, and Mexico. We simply do not build overseas, and hence claim that we are fully prepared for a post-pandemic world. We are rugged, powder coated, Canadian nickel plated, standards based, certified, with the broadest temperature and humidity range, as well as we have the longest propagation range. Our technology is purpose built for the harshest environment on this planet, specifically for the mission critical infrastructure industries. And that is our focus. Our focus is reliability, as opposed to just peak data rate or capacity. So that is who we are. Let's get to the topic of today. Let's break it down. So I will begin with an introduction to the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act of 2009 funded a smart grid investment grant program. So this was the program was funded by the Obama administration. Now I assume that all of us, here know very well what smart grid is, and some of us may even be getting fed up of hearing why it makes sense to invest in smart grid. So I'm not going to get into too much details of the benefits, but I will summarize the benefits achieved by this specific program in a couple of slides. But my main focus is going to be the lessons that American utilities reported, by executing the projects, under this program over a 7-year period. The challenges that they faced during the execution of these strategic capital intensive projects, and the practices which helped them in avoiding these challenges, or if they couldn't avoid it, then helping them in addressing these challenges. In the end, I will conclude with what those of us in Canada, what the Canadian utilities can learn from this program going forward. How can we incorporate those lessons into the projects into a smart grid projects that we are planning and executing as we speak? So the smart grid investment grant program, very high level overview. These were 99 competitively selected projects. The total number of utilities and organizations, even system operators, that participated in the program were more than 200, so 228 to be specific. The program was conducted over a 6-year period, although the final reports and documentation, if you incorporate that, then it was a 7-year sort of period for it. The total spending capital involved, public and private. So remember, it was funded by the Obama administration, but the utilities were supposed to pitch in 50% or more into these projects. So about $4.5 billion were invested by the utilities that participated in this program, and about $3.4 billion in federal funding. So in total, we are looking at about $8 billion worth of investments that happened specifically for these projects. And this is no secret. The U.S. Department of Energy has this information available on their website. They've created a separate sort of section for smart grid, and you can find the final SGIG report that was provided to the public in 2016, as well as the final project description documents for each of these 99 projects on that website. So, if we break it down, the capital numbers, about $500 million were spent on electric transmission system, mainly synchrophasers. about $2 billion, a little more than $2 billion on distribution automation, things like automated switching, and then advanced metering infrastructure, smart metering, $4.5 billion, and customer systems. So these included, home area networks, in-home displays, programmable thermostats, that kind of equipment to give the customers the capability to monitor and manage their own energy usage. In total, about close to 1,400 network synchrophases, which represented a tenfold increase in synchrophaser deployment. About 700,000 customer devices were installed. 82,000 intelligent automated devices were installed for the distribution system, and about 16 million smart meters, which is about 33% of the smart meters deployed in the US during a 5-year period from 2010 to 2014. So some of the key benefits that were reported by these utilities, remember that this program as a whole demonstrated that smart grid technologies are able to deliver benefits, benefits that everyone anticipated, but were never proven before, before 2009, 2010. So this program overall did prove that those benefits, at least a big chunk of them, were real. Local, so for example, some of these benefits were preventing local disturbances from cascading into major regional blackouts, fewer and shorter outages. So basically reducing the frequency of outages as well as the duration of these outages. And as we know in our industry, in this industry, it's not just it's not just about avoiding an outage. It is also about how quickly can we recover from an outage. So these projects definitely provided that benefit. Grid resilience against extreme weather situations was improved. The more accurate outage location identification was a major result. Equipment monitoring, preventive maintenance, there was an improvement in that area, as well as the ultimate goal of smart grid, which is managing the peak demand and reducing the overall costs, for example, for AMI, metering and billing. So overall, the benefits reported by the utilities were pretty significant, which justified the investments. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I am not going to discuss all the benefits in detail, but we'll use this one example from the DOE's, SGIG final report, just as a reminder as to what the benefits actually look like. So, for example, EPB Chattanooga demonstrated benefits achieved by leveraging automated feeder switching and AMI data during service restoration from an incident in 2012. And according to EPB's estimate, by leveraging this new data, they were able to reduce the service restoration time by about 17 hours, which equated to, avoiding about $23 million in customer damages, basically a cost to the local economy. So overall, a great benefit, but does that mean that we should just close our eyes and go ahead and invest in these technologies? Well, yes and no. we have to remember that return without risk is not possible. So these benefits do come at a risk, and if utilities are not careful and cautious and do not manage these risks, then some of these benefits may not be achieved, at least not as optimally as these could be. Part of this whole progress and evolution of the grid is learning from each other. There's a need to look at specifically the lessons learned that these utilities reported to understand what were the risks that American utilities like EPB were exposed to, what they reported on, and what did they do about it. Now, with that said, I do acknowledge that the industry structure and hence the culture in Canada is a bit different than in US. You don't see many investor-owned utilities here. We are a bit more risk averse as compared to utilities in US. But it is specifically that risk averse nature which must drive us to dig a bit deeper into these risks that such projects are exposed to. And that is what we are going to do. At a high level, if you go through the report, the SGIG report on this program, the report will state that a number of projects suffered from schedule delays, cost overruns, and because these were fixed budget projects, a number of utilities had to reduce the scope, and hence you can say while the projects were declared successful, they were suboptimal in achieving the original objectives of these projects. So USDOE did in that report does categorize these risks into 8 different areas: project management and coordination, and repeated sort of lesson, if you dig deeper, is around vendor management in that area and around project governance. Other risks were workforce training and expertise development, communication system requirements, data storage and analysis, system integration, cybersecurity, and end user engagement and education. So the report does talk about it, but what it does not answer is, the fact that all these projects, the scope varied across these projects. So what was the effect of these project parameters on the likelihood of experiencing these risks? That is something that needs to be explored, and that is something that I think we as a community need to dig deeper before we invest in the information and communication technologies further to develop and execute these projects. So let's dig deeper into the smart grid investment grant programs lessons learned. Now, if we look at, if you go through all the 99 documents that were submitted by these projects and go through specifically the lessons learned section, you will see that of the total 99 projects, it's about 76 utilities reported lessons learned around project management and coordination, whether it's stakeholder engagement or vendor management or project governance structures, reporting mechanisms, communication, engaging with the customers. All the utilities reported lessons around these, which were all categorized by the DOE under the project management and coordination risk category. The rest of the risks although not as high as project management, are still significant. So for example, if you look at system integration, almost 40% utilities reported challenges around system integration. When it comes to customer systems and AMI, of course, that was a challenge. Customer engagement was a challenge. 36%, so 36 utilities out of the 99 reported challenges around these. Is this enough? I'd say no. We need to dig even a bit deeper than that to understand what were these projects that reported these lessons. What was the scope of these projects? Does it make, and which of these make sense, so we can incorporate those lessons into the planning decisions that we are making today, and the project execution decisions that we are making today to make our projects more successful. So, the very first lesson that, I'm going to take a look at is, as I mentioned, the one reported the most by all utilities: project management and coordination. And if you break it down by, the project parameters, so that from project parameters here, I mean the variables that you see at the bottom of this chart, which capture the variation in scope across all projects based on project budget. So whether the project budget in this case, was it above 25 million or below 25 million, that's sort of a demark we selected, considering that the overall project budgets range from 800,000 all the way to 645 million. So you can imagine the variation just looking at that one variable, and recognize that, of course, not all the 8 risks identified by the Department of Energy would apply equally to all these projects, considering that kind of variation in the project budget. Similarly, we need to look at the project scope. So did the scope cover the transmission system, the distribution system, customer system, or the metering infrastructure? What kind of communication technologies were used? Did they deploy RF mesh or microwave? Was the cellular network or copper lease line from public carriers, were these technologies leveraged to establish connectivity and incorporate smartness into the grid? Did the utilities use OPGW, their own optical fiber infrastructure? Did they build optical fiber infrastructure, or any other technology? Was home area network involved, where a Zigbee network was part of the project scope? Power line carrier. Some utilities leverage power line carrier for at least some portion of their infrastructure. And then one variable, let's remember that because system integration and equipment and technology and software testing and modeling and these risks were reported. So we need to look at the scope from a number of technologies perspective as well. What were the projects? Divide the projects based on whether less than 2 technologies or only 2 technologies were leveraged or were in scope in the project, or more than 2 technologies, communication technologies, were used to establish that smart grid. So using this criteria, if you break down the lessons, you see that the highest likelihood for a project to report project management challenges was when the project was using more than 2 communication system technologies. So if the scope included, let's say, cellular technology, the utility's own RF mesh, and power line carrier, project management challenges were higher than others in this case. So remember, this is not causation, this is statistical, so it's more correlation, as opposed to that these things caused a higher frequency of reporting the lessons learned. It's more a correlation that the projects which deployed more than 2 communication systems also had a higher risk of reporting project management lessons. And by the way, it's lowest for power line carrier. Is an existing infrastructure, and utilities are very comfortable with using it. So it would make sense to some extent. Another major challenge, workforce training and expertise development. 30% of the projects reported that smart grid technologies impact the existing workforce, and that utilities must plan to invest in expertise development. Now, this is pretty much consistent across all the criteria, except maybe lowest for projects where optical fiber was the main communication technology used, which maybe makes sense because again, OPGW is something that and fiber-based networks like Sonnet or even IBM, these technologies have been around in utilities for a while. So we can conclude that maybe that's the reason why the expertise development need was maybe a bit low for projects that relied on fiber. So looking at evaluating communication system requirements, 30% projects overall reported the need to capture communication system requirements upfront. Is that a surprise? From my perspective, no. Specifically, if you break it down and look at it, that when it comes to projects which included distribution system in scope, I would presume that most utilities engineered networks for AMI and assume that the communication system will be capable of supporting distribution automation as well. Later found out that this was unfortunately not the case, at least for a number of them. So you see a higher frequency of that lesson in projects where distribution system was in scope. You see a higher frequency where cellular networks, public carrier. So utilities relied on the public carrier as opposed to their own internal private infrastructure. We know that when it comes to things like outages, scheduling those outages in our industry is a complex task. And then whenever we use public infrastructure from a carrier, there are challenges when it comes to facing and planning for such outages and reacting to such outages. We see that, for example, more than 2 communication system technologies, again, the risk was higher. And once again, it's lowest for power line carrier. I would still say it's not a surprise. Okay, let's look at data storage analysis and visualization. Now, this lesson or risk was reported by about 20% of the projects. They realized that there was a need to plan for data storage analysis and visualization beyond just data collection via the new infrastructure. There's a very clear sort of indication here. If you see on the left side of the graph, circled in red, that risk or reporting of that lesson almost doubles for projects that deployed synchrophasers across their infrastructure. And again, I would say that makes perfect sense for those of us who have been involved in such projects and have then lived beyond just project execution but into operation as well. Another, if we look at system integration, again, 40% of the projects reported facing system integration issues. Sort of consistent message from them was use out-of-box standard-based solution technologies. Some technologies out there are still immature, so be aware of system integration issues upfront. And you can see from the graph, that the system integration risk is higher for projects which relied on more than two communication technologies or even public area. Again, something that does make sense. And remember, some of these lessons then relate to other lessons as well. So if you go through the detailed project description documents, you will see that when the customer or when the project team highlights a lesson around system integration, they will tie it to things like vendor management in project management, and say that because this is an issue, coordinating the multiple vendors, most of these projects are complex, with multiple addressing multiple areas of the power system, deploying multiple technologies when it comes to ICT, information and communication technologies. So coordination and management of these multiple vendors throughout the project to prepare for system integration at the end. That is a consistent activity that the project team needs to be on top of, and on top of throughout the project, not just the project life cycle, I'd say even the system life cycle. Equipment and software testing and modeling. Again, 30% projects, slightly more, highlighted the need to plan for software and equipment testing and modeling. Once again, makes sense, because a lot of these, remember, this is 2009 to 2016, and it's true even today. These technologies are still under developed, and back then more so. So hence, going through a proof of concept, there were utilities that looked like they didn't go through a proof of concept stage or validated the technologies in a lab environment, and hence face challenges due to that. There were utilities, on the other hand, that did report avoiding such challenges because they invested in a proof of concept before actually deploying the technology on a large scale, or they did invest in a dedicated lab where they proactively planned for system integration and identified potential issues upfront. So it is a key lesson that we need to keep in mind whenever we are planning smart grid projects. And again, if you look at the graph, the highest, this lesson highest for public area, so cellular networks mainly. Again, I would speculate that maybe that's because an assumption was made upfront that, say, an AMI collector deployed will seamlessly communicate with the MDMS or head-end system back in a control center via the cellular infrastructure, and maybe that wasn't the case, or the actual execution of that technology should have been tested and processes developed for it upfront. In this case, if we see when it comes to transmission systems, the reporting of this lesson learned was much lower. The frequency was much lower for those. Something to be aware of. Overall, I'll say it again. Going through these lessons and digging a bit deeper than what the DOE report simply says, and conducting the analysis on these, the sort of main contribution here is to share those lessons with the broader community, so we can make better planning and project execution decisions today. How we incorporate these lessons, of course, depends on the project, and that will require some thinking beyond just what's being presented today. But some guidance I will provide towards the end, though. Okay, cybersecurity. Again, about 25% projects reported cybersecurity as a major challenge, and recommended to proactively engage security teams at project initiation. Now, I'll be honest, I was a bit surprised when I saw the 25% number, because I had assumed, personally, that maybe that sort of challenge would have been more frequent. Um, and I was expecting something more similar to, let's say, system integration issues, at least a 40 to 50% project rate. But then I realized, and I would speculate, that this was, these projects began in 2009, 2010. NERC was already, a big sort of change trigger in the utility industry. A lot of utilities would have already pulled in or invested in cybersecurity expertise, pulled in the right resources, while they were planning, during the planning of these projects, and hence avoided these. And maybe that's why the rate was not as high. Is it something is it definite? Is that the explanation? I don't know. It's something that maybe we as a community may need to research, but I would speculate that that's the reason. We are a very cybersecurity aware industry, but still there are utilities that did not pull in the cybersecurity resources upfront, and maybe face challenges because of that. So which is something you see repeatedly, at least for these 1 out of 4 projects in the lessons learned. The utility would strongly recommend that pull in security teams in your organization when you're planning these projects. Another one, consumer engagement and education, and no surprise, it's highest for projects deploying customer systems, which, as I mentioned earlier, in-home displays, programmable thermometers, home area programmable thermostats, sorry, home area networks, and lowest, and it is lowest for projects deploying smart grid technologies to support transmission system applications, which again makes perfect sense, and at least from my perspective. Overall, 35% projects highlighted the need to invest in and plan for customer engagement and education. If you go through those documents, you will see there were some major sort of best practices that utilities adopted and reported, and one can, project managers can learn from those. So one more sort of risk area that was added to this list beyond the smart grid, beyond the Department of Energy's highlighted 8 risks, was that of operations transition, because this was again about 1 in 5 projects reported challenges faced because the project teams because the organizations were not prepared to transition the new infrastructure and operationalize it. Tools, processes, even people's expertise was impacted. There were gaps in there that were supposed to be addressed by the project, which were not. Again, as you can see, the frequency of this risk lowest for power line carrier, and pretty consistent, I'd say, for the rest. And again, lower for public carrier, by the way, is, and that's maybe the advantage of public carrier is, the impact, or the operations impact, the kind of tools required to monitor and manage a private, communication infrastructure, and the team that you need to build, those are not needed, and hence the operations transition is simpler for that kind of infrastructure. Just snapshot of the lessons learned statements, some that I've captured, from these, these are exact wordings verbatim from these documents that were submitted by these utilities, and you can read through them. I've provided sort of the utility references there. But you can see a consistency in pretty much, things like robust communication infrastructure. Specific wording was used by multiple utilities, saying that it should be as robust as a power system that is supporting. Dedicated project managers and project teams in place. Data integrity and security issues. And then again, utilities like, let's say, Sacramento Municipal Utility District, claiming that technologies prove to be immature, or stating that technologies prove to be immature, and some vendors overpromised and underdelivered. So conclusions and recommendations, I'll try to summarize. The very first one, if you go through those 99 documents, project leadership, project management, governance, dedicated resources, these are considered essentials. Resource sharing with other projects or with operations organizations, that reduce the chances of success. Multiple utilities reported the need to have dedicated resources to these complex projects. Another key one, project managers need to give special attention to stakeholder engagement and management, especially when there are multiple vendors involved, especially when there are customer systems involved. And, things like corporate sponsorship, very key. Vendor management, a key lesson. Most projects involve multiple vendors, and technology propriety and immaturity was an issue. Vendors overall overpromised and underdelivered. Multiple utilities reported that, and the recommendation from most of them is standard-based technology fit for the utility industry requirement. Another key lesson, I'd say, manage risk or manage a crisis. Plan for risk. We know that industrial information and communication technology infrastructure must last longer than similar carrier and enterprise networks. In one of the riskiest environment on the planet, like safety is a big issue, safety of people and capital intensive infrastructure. So maybe a telecom network from a public carrier, is usually, it's revenue driven. So maybe you don't have that network extended to rural area. That's not the case with power system. Power system has to go everywhere, maybe the harshest environment. Those, there are risks associated with it, and those should be planned for. Managing risk is important, and these risks cannot be managed without planning for them. Just overall, it doesn't matter what framework you use when it comes to risk management, whether it's the ISO 31000, PMBOK, or just a, standard 5-stage risk management framework you use. The sort of key recommendation is do it in a structured manner, adopt a framework, and just go ahead, leverage the lessons, and plan and execute the projects accordingly. Last but not least, I will leave you with this key message that high quality planning leads to success. Research over the past few decades have consistently shown this, that specifically risk planning and management activities significantly improves chances of project success and achieving project objectives. So do take a look at your planning activities to answer the question, are they sufficient to build and operate a smart and reliable grid? And how can you incorporate these lessons into your planning and execution decisions? Something that we recommend at Redline, and maybe a topic of a future webinar, is digital transformation planning circle, which is basically adopting a system lifecycle view, not just a project lifecycle view, but a system lifecycle view, from system conception to actual engineering and design, to execution, to operations, as well as retirement. That entire system lifecycle view, focusing on reliability, cost effectiveness, and risk management. With that, I will say thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and let's open the forum for Q&A. Alex, do you have any? Yeah.
We'll now open the session to questions from our audience. Please use the question functions to type any questions you have. And I do have two, so one moment while I read the first. You mentioned on one of your slides that technology selection should be driven by utility industry specific requirements. Which requirements are you referring to?
High level functional and non-functional. So see, our industry's main purpose, the way I've always viewed it, is to keep the lights on, utility bills low, and stay safe while doing our jobs. So how do you translate that to specifying requirements for technology selection, whether it's IT or communication technology? It's basically safety, reliability, and cost effectiveness. So select technologies that will keep our people and the capital intensive assets, grid assets, safe and secure, ensure reliable electricity supply to end users with minimal impact on the utility bill. So make sure you address requirements such as, as I already mentioned, longer life cycle requirement. We know that the equipment and or devices specifically developed for the IT enterprise networks have a shorter life cycle. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, scheduling resources to deploy and maintain anything is a big challenge in this industry. Overall, it takes time for us to plan to send resources to a substation and upgrade the substation. So life cycle expectation here is longer. Do keep those requirements into your plan whenever and your project and your technology and vendor selection criteria. Things like a secure supply chain. We are living in a post-pandemic world. We've already seen what the pandemic can do. These kind of this now poses a challenge to the supply chain of whatever technology we're using. Choose equipment that is fit for the outdoors or substation, equipment that can survive the Canadian winter, extended temperature range, humidity range, equipment that will minimize, any negative impact on existing infrastructure. So for example, power consumption of a device that goes on a pole. If the demand power consumption is high, you have to then think about deploying extra additional infrastructure, to support that device. And this is going to not just impact capital expenditure, but your operational expenditure as well.
Thank you. And
Welcome.
a very, very subtle pitch for Redline there, as you used almost the exact same terminology to in
Well,
your introduction.
yeah,
No, it's a great answer, and it showcases the expertise you bring to the market and the advantage that your equipment is, or advantages that your equipment has. I do have one more question, and I do encourage everyone on the line to submit any questions you have into the question panel, as shown on the Q&A slide in front of you. The second question. You talked about convergence of people, process, and tools. What activities can one include in the project scope to drive such convergence?
Okay, now that is a loaded question, and it's a very broad topic. I'll try to answer it as concisely as I can. When you introduce a new tool or a technology, we know that there is a need to invest in training the workforce and in updating the process. Technology on its own will never solve your problem. If I can buy my dad a smartphone like an iPhone. I know it's the easiest to use, but still, if I don't show him how to use it, it doesn't add any benefit to his life. I bought him a watch, and if I don't show him how to monitor, how to use the ECG feature or things like that, then it's just a watch, just another watch. So before as I give it to him, I have to explain to him how to use it. So the same philosophy. Before deploying it, analyze the impact on the existing people and processes. In my 2 decades in the industry, I have come across so many project teams working on upgrading, let's say, analog microwave to Sonnet, or Sonnet to IP/MPLS, or deploying WiMAX, private LTE, or even an RF mesh for AMI. Where the team just assumed that the network operations team will simply take over the network once they are done. And then at the final stages of the project team discovers that operations is not ready. They don't have the right tools. There is no funding to integrate the new network management system into the OSS within that network operations center. In some cases, the utility does not even have a network operations team. And then the engineers who actually designed and deployed the network are expected to continue supporting that infrastructure, and stay, let's say, on call even on the weekends to support that infrastructure once the network is in operations. From my perspective, why this happens is because some of it is the industry structure, because we are focused on capex as opposed to opex, and what that drives is maybe a focus on project, what the project is deploying, and let's get the project complete and then move on, as opposed to at least from a project team's perspective, the focus on operations. So I think the very first sort of recommendation that I give, the recommendation that I give to my customers is ask yourself, how are you going to operate this new technology, this new network, once it is ready? And once you transfer your mission critical applications onto this infrastructure, who is going to operate and maintain this new infrastructure? What tools will they use? What processes will they use? What competence and capabilities do they need? Collect all that information, think it through, talk to the operations people out there, and capture these all these requirements. And from my perspective, these are all capital expenditures, and a bunch of them should be paid for by the project.
We have a few questions that have come in, and we might not get to all of them, just to let everyone know. We will be concluding this webinar sharp at the top of the hour to respect your time, but to keep the questions going. This one comes in from Curtis Chong, and I'll ask both of his questions together. What proportion of the projects analyzed include a risk assessment phase and include project management experience at inception? And as a follow-on, have there been any Canadian-wide studies or surveys of smart grid projects which highlight experiences and lessons learned?
Good question. So I'll answer the second part of it, before the first one, because that's simple. I'm not aware of many that are detailed when it comes to Canadian smart grid projects. If anyone in the audience is aware of these studies, specifically where the data is available to the public, do share. I think that's how we learn. And then the back to the first question. What percent, did a risk assessment in the beginning? I haven't talked to all the customers, of course. I will respond based on the documents that are available in the public domain. If I remember correctly, there were only 2 project documents that mentioned that an investment in a detailed risk assessment was made upfront. So from a risk management perspective, and then project management overall was, I think that was significant. About I'd say 1/3 of the projects do mention specifically that they invested in the project management expertise. They brought in, project managers who had expertise with ICT technologies, and in some cases, they reported hiring consultants who brought these expertise with them. And project governance structures were put in place. From that perspective, I'd say about 1/3 were prepared for it. At least, that's what we find in the reports.
Okay, thank you. And one last quick question to round out the webinar. How many utilities has Redline worked with or is working with?
How many of the top of my, I'd say a number in dozens right now, at least more than a dozen. Remember, as I mentioned, we have projects in 70 countries. Also keep in mind, by the way, just to be open here, I joined Redline this year, a few months ago, so I'm still learning about the organization. I know that we are working with Canadian utilities here, at least the major ones, and we are working with utilities in the US. We are working with utilities in the Middle East. I'd say a number of them. Historically, I'll be honest, our focus has been on oil and gas, I'd say till about a few years ago, but right now we are very focused on mission critical infrastructure and specifically the utility industries.
Thank you. So thank you, Ishaq, and to the whole Redline team for being part of the CEA conversation series. Your contribution has been much appreciated, and I think you've brought some really interesting points forward for everyone to consider on how to make sure your smart grid project is successful. As we close out the webinar, I would like to remind everyone that there are other webinars in the conversation series. 2 upcoming ones are on September 17th. Oracle Utilities will be presenting electric utilities post-COVID, what's next and how should utilities respond. And on September 22nd, Lexop will be presenting how meeting customer preferences can help you adapt during a downturn. If you haven't registered yet, you can do so by going to CEA's website at www.electricity.ca. Thank you everyone for your time and have a good afternoon.
Thank you everyone.